Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to 2CTV, the channel that challenges the mainstream media and the political establishment, from the left-wing nutters to the globalist elites. And we're going to start today with a live stream, with a bit of a breaking news, a semi-breaking news. Well, the report from the Privileges Committee has already been published this morning, a couple hours ago. And we're going to react to the report. We are going to be talking about Boris Johnson's reaction and what he's up to, and the Tory MPs. And we have a special guest on the channel. We have a barrister, a freedom fighter, and a truth teller who always tells the truth about the legal matters, Stephen Barrett, who has been on the show before. We're going to have Stephen Barrett as a guest to talk about his perspective on the report, on the Privileges Committee in general, and the so-called Kangaroo Court mentality that they've been creating. So now I'm going to come to the live stream as well to get live chat to get your reaction. We have the first live chat before we start. Holy buggering hell! Not another live stream. I'm so glad I got your support, guys. You got my back. It's brilliant. Yeah, everyone's looking forward to when I do live stream. Yeah, first supportive comment of the day in the live chat. All right, let's start. Let's begin this because we have a guest as well on the show. The report is officially out, and I went through it. It's fascinating because, and the whole point of this video, and that's why I'm going to talk to Stephen Barrett about this, it's not a legal court. We have to keep clarifying this to the political left on Twitter, and all the leftists and liberals who keep saying, well, it's been found guilty. Boris Johnson's been found guilty. Or you don't have to like Boris Johnson. You can like or dislike Boris, but you can also be sure that this court is this committee is a kangaroo court. It's not legal. You can't find an MP guilty in this committee. It doesn't work that way. And now we're going to be talking about why the punishment that this report was going to give Boris. That's why Boris Johnson resigned. Some people say, well, he was a coward. He left. It was a technical move because he had to resign in order to avoid this fake punishment. It's absolutely chaotic what they've had in mind, what to do. They were going to completely permanently ban him from returning to Parliament and take away his pass, which usually former MPs could have, and it is completely biased. For example, this section of the report, the final conclusion in relation to sanctions. Although Mr. Johnson's resignation as an MP renders it impossible for a sanction of suspension to be imposed, we draw attention to the fact that before the events of Friday, the 9th of June, we had provisionally agreed to recommend a suspension long enough to engage the provisions of the Recall of MPs Act. So they had an agenda. They wanted to make sure he's suspended enough so that they could have a by-election. So that's not really impartial anyway. In the light of Mr. Johnson's further contempts, we put on record that if he had not resigned his seat, we would have recommended that he be suspended from the service of the House for 90 days for repeated contempts and for seeking to undermine the parliamentary process by deliberately misleading the House, deliberately misleading the committee, breaching confidence in punishing the committee, and therefore undermining the democratic process of the House, being complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. He was very supportive of the committee, by the way, publicly speaking. In the view of the fact that Mr. Johnson is no longer a member, we now recommend that he should not be granted a former member's pass. This is a witch hunt. This is literally a witch hunt. Again, you don't have to be a Boris Johnson supporter. I'm not a Boris Johnson supporter. But you can see it's a witch hunt. It's in their language and their tone. Anyway, so that's the report. Now, there's a lot of reaction to the report. It's fascinating. Let's just compare this punishment for Boris to the others, previous ones. For example, Christian Calgary from The Express said, it's worth remembering the 3 members of the Privileges Committee voted to save Margaret Ferrier, the SNP MP who broke the rules as well, by giving her a suspension of 9 days. He broke the rules during the lockdown. She broke the rules during the lockdown, and she lied about it. But these guys, they voted to save her by giving her a suspension of 9 days. The same members of the committee, despite her actions literally endangering lives, according to Calgary. Look forward to reading the Boris report in full. It says Costa, Jenkin, and Walker better have good reasons. These guys voted to save Margaret Ferrier, to just give her 9-day suspension. But that's not the only case. Example, remember Rob Roberts, the MP who was suspended for 6 weeks for being creepy and handsy with people, with staffers in Parliament. He received a 6 weeks suspension. Boris Johnson was going to receive a 12-week suspension. I mean, it's not even proportionate. You can see the bias when it came to the Boris Johnson witch hunt. So that's that. Now, baby, I'm going to continue giving you guys the update. For those of you who joined late, we have a special guest on the show in a few minutes. Stephen Barrett, the barrister who tells the truth about the legal matters and the establishment. He's going to come on the show, tell us about the Kangaroo Court, that is, the Privileges Committee. Christian Calgary also said the committee complains now that Boris Johnson's resignation broke the confidentiality of the process by revealing the contents of the warning letter and linked material. According to Calgary, translation, he basically undermined the spotlight on us on our big day. So the members of the committee are just angry that, hey, this was our day. Pay attention to us. We are the gods of morality and procedure. And Boris Johnson's basically stole our thunder. That's basically the translation in that. Now, we have a quote from Boris Johnson saying, Boris said, "This is rubbish. It is a lie. In order to reach this deranged conclusion, the committee is obliged to say a series of things that are patently absurd. It is for the people of this country to decide who sits in Parliament, not Harriet Harman." To be fair, I agree. As I said, I'm not even a Boris fan, but I agree with this comment. If you break the law and if, for example, the police arrest you and take you to jail, that's fine. You know, you're a criminal, you go to jail, we have the rule of law. But you can't have a fake court in Parliament deciding your fate as an MP. It makes no sense. It should be up to the people to decide. So, this witch hunt continues to escalate. We have a fascinating situation here now. Sky News. Are you ready for this? Sky News, or Sly News. The biased Sly News. This morning, we're chasing around Boris Johnson while he was on a morning run. This is the quality or lack of quality of the mainstream media, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be the weirdest thing you've seen. Well, it's not really surprising. It's Sky News journalists and reporters and other mainstream media reporters shouting and screaming at Boris Johnson. The usual thing they do when someone's walking around and they ask him, they ask questions that they know the person's not going to answer. Just watch this.
Is this the end, Mr. Johnson? Have you run out of road? Will you take responsibility for anything? Have your criticisms of the committee backfired?
Firstly, it's always a waste of time when so-called journalists and reporters do this. It turns into harassment. You're just shouting words. You're just saying things. But also, when you listen to the content of the sort of questions they were asking and the way they were asking, they're showing their bias. I have a problem with this. Everybody knows my leaning. I'm honest about my leanings and my opinions. These guys at Sky News or BBC News, they claim to be impartial, they claim to be neutral, and they claim to just be objective and, just reporting the news, right? But these sort of questions, you can see the bias. Again, I don't want to defend Boris Johnson here, but this is just, if they could come for Boris today, they could come for me tomorrow. They could come for you guys the next day. If you stand for Parliament, they could come for you. So the reason we are essentially defending Boris Johnson, while we are technically criticizing the enemies of Boris Johnson, is because one day, and they're already doing it, they can do it to anybody else. They are bringing down Boris Johnson with this witch hunt in order to create a precedent. So anybody else who tells the truth or tries to basically go against the norm of the establishment, they could bring him down. This is the reality. So now, all this aside, we have Tory MPs and allies of Boris Johnson who already made their move. They've already launched the attack. And as I said yesterday, the grenades are being thrown around left, right and centre. The Tory party is tearing itself apart. Brendan Clark-Smith and many others have been posting out, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, supportive tweets. I'm backing Boris, they said. Brendan said, "I'm appalled at what I have read and this spiteful, vindictive and overreaching conclusions of the report. I won't be supporting the recommendations and will be speaking against them both publicly and in the House on Monday. I'm backing fairness and justice, not kangaroo courts. All right. Now, on the issue of kangaroo court, we now have a special guest. As I mentioned earlier, we have a barrister, Stephen Barrett, who is a truth teller. He always tries to be objective and factual when it comes to legal matters and constitutional matters. Let's go to Stephen and see what he has to say about this so-called kangaroo court. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are now joined by our patriotic lawyer and barrister, Stephen Barrett, who's now, at this point, I think you're the channel's barrister. So welcome back to the show, Stephen. How are you?
I'm very well. That's very kind. I don't think I can be described as a patriot because I think that's a political position.
I don't think so. I think.
All right, I'll give you.
So, okay, fine. An unpatriotic lawyer. So we have the report out finally from the Privileges Committee, and there's been so much drama around. There's politics around there, but there have been lawyers trying to analyze it or see it from the legal perspective. So in this video, in this interview, I want to ask you about your perspective on the report, whether do you think that this Privileges Committee, because the way they're portraying it in the media, that it's like a legal court, whether it is a legal court, obviously it's a rhetorical question. And also, we are now hearing that the people in charge of it are going to be sanctioning and punishing certain people, MPs, if they call it a kangaroo court. So first things first, what do you think of this whole saga?
Well, 9 months ago, probably the most respected barrister in the land, who beat Boris in the prorogation case, which caused Boris a huge amount of embarrassment and political difficulty and all of the rest of it, who is in the House of Lords, who is a highly, highly respected non-partisan figure, wrote to the committee and advised them that they were messing up. And they were. And they decided to ignore him. And 9 months later, it has turned out that ignoring the advice of Lord Panic is perhaps not the wisest thing to do.
Oh, wow.
And they've managed to get themselves into a total mess. Law is very technical and precise. And we should have noticed early on that a great switcheroo was happening, a lot of jazz hands. So when they debated the motion, they said that it would need to knowingly mislead.
Yeah.
And that's what's in Parliament's rule. That's what's in Erskine May. That's what everybody expects to do, because if you lie to somebody, you knowingly mislead them. If you ask me the way to the supermarket and I don't know the way to the supermarket or get it wrong, I'm not lying to you if I sadly send you in the wrong direction. I would have genuinely been trying to direct you towards the supermarket, but being me, and I'm particularly bad at directions, I got it wrong, and I'm terribly sorry. But you can't hold me up and call me a liar just because I made a mistake. And that's a basic foundational principle of law. I mean, that really shouldn't be contestable. But they decided to ignore that. And they decided that they'd go ahead with recklessly misled, whatever that means. And apparently they're going to define it. Now, when I talk about all these things, the power to define what something is in law is everything. That's God power. So you either follow the rule of law, which means you use the existing definition, or you sort of assume this God power. And it's very interesting. Recently, an AI, these AI programs. Well, a lawyer in America got this AI bot to write his submissions to the court. And the AI bot stumbled across this truth, what the parliamentary committee has stumbled across, that if you just rewrite all the law, then you win the case. So the AI bot went around just inventing fake cases.
Oh my God.
And it cited from them, so it quoted from these fake cases. Yeah. And the attorney who did this was like, "Oh, this is great. We're definitely going to win." And he put it into the court, and the judge went, "Yeah, these are not cases.
They don't exist."
I know they support your case, but this isn't the law.
Wow.
And really, because there's no judge in the case of this parliamentary committee, because they are basically feral, They have gone into a lawless place. They've put the rule of law aside. They've put the rule of consistent application of rules aside. They've done another switcheroo, which is that they're only supposed to look at the legality. So that means whether or not, when Boris said that the rules were followed, were the rules followed? Now, that was always going to be an uphill challenge for them because the Metropolitan Police investigated that and said he's not a serial rule breaker. So rather than face any of these challenges, it's very difficult for them to prove knowingly mislead. So rather than face the challenge, they do jazz hands and they change the word.
They've gone with their feelings and instinct and essentially their biases.
Oh, I think that's very true, Maya, when you say it's all about feelings.
Yeah, how they feel. Yeah.
Yes. And when you leave reason and the consistent application of rules, which is what law is, what I do, and you move into emotion, that is the antithesis of the rule of law. It's the opposite of what justice is supposed to be. And it doesn't end well when humans do this. I mean, there is nothing new under the sun. Humans have done all of these things before. And when they start doing this, it doesn't go well.
So just a quick thing. Obviously, we're now clarified it was not a legal court. And obviously, there's a parliamentary procedure is also basically made up, as in the House creates procedures. There's a speaker, the House authorities. If we were to have something like this to happen for a member of parliament, I'm guessing the most logical thing to do is that the Speaker of the House of Commons has a team and alongside the authorities, House authorities. So technically speaking, if you have to do something like this, any sort of investigation into a member misleading knowingly or accidentally should be the job of the Speaker's office, right? Because the Speaker is the referee of the chamber, not really the other MPs, the colleagues of that MP to make up their own court, right?
Well, I mean, the Speaker is ultimately responsible for this. Parliament is ultimately responsible through its own reputation. But the Constitution allows them to do this. And then the promise that they've sort of always made back is that they will apply their rules in a consistent way. And this committee is unique in that it isn't doing that. Normally, they do apply their rules in a consistent way. And there's usually a declaration that they're doing it. I mean, this committee contains a declaration that's doing it. That's why they're reacting with sort of emotion and punishment to how dare anybody say that we're not doing it. But if you analyze what they're doing, they're not doing it. And that's really important. It puts me in a total, like when you call me a patriot.
Yeah.
See at the beginning. And then immediately I said, well, look, I want to be politically neutral. So you said you're an anti-patriot.
Yeah, exactly. That's how
I just want to be neutral. And what the committee is doing to me is saying, we are completely respectable and we are following the rule of law. And you go through it and you go, well, you aren't. It's like, well, you're saying that we're completely unrespectable.
Perfect example.
I'm saying that you're not following the rule of law. If you think that is respectable or not is your personal political opinion. What I am doing is analysing fact.
Right.
And they seem, fact and truth and objectivity, that is what law is.
Yeah.
And if they don't want to have to deal with that, if they don't want to have to act in a rational way, then they could stop pretending to be lawyers. We've some other barristers have weighed in now, and I'm always grateful for numerical support. I've often found myself in public life sort of on my own at the beginning, but I had tendency to be kindly treated later on. And another KC has weighed in over the weekend, and he adopts a really nice phrase, which is a quasi-judicial process. So because the Constitution means that they can't be held to account by a court, they've always gone, we can do whatever we like. Like, well, that's technically true. You have promised that you will be a quasi-judicial process. You have undertaken that you will apply the rule of law. And it's really important then that we hold them to that standard. And I'm not even criticizing the committee, because such is my commitment to political neutrality that I will tell you that you can have show trials if you want to. You could have, if everybody in Britain...
But you have to be clear about it, the difference in that and a legal court. So when we say kangaroo court, it's not as an insult. Obviously, some people will use it as an insult. We're using it to clarify that it's not an actual court.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the majority of human beings alive today do not live in democracy. So they don't live in states where there is the rule of law. So it's actually quite common for humans to not live in states governed by the rule of law. And in fact, throughout antiquity, throughout history, we've had tyrants before. We've only been rule of law since about 1689. which ironically is when the Bill of Rights was written, that allows them to do this. But that's how long until the Parliamentary Committee on Privileges in 2023, the history books will write, the United Kingdom was a rule of law state.
But okay, so on that front, the committee are now exercising, again, new made-up powers, I'm guessing, because some MPs, members of the Privy Council, have been criticising and calling him Kangaroo Court. It's their opinion, I guess. And they want to now sanction and punish people for using words. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, I think this is all clearly tied up in emotion because we're getting leaks even now. I mean, the latest leak to a journalist is that there's going to be some sort of expose of a conspiracy to point out that they're not following the rule of law. Well, good luck if they try and tie me up in some sort of conspiracy. Or this KC who weighed in over the weekend, who I actually had never spoken to before yesterday. So good luck to saying that we're involved in some sort of
coup.
The reason we're saying you're not following the rule of law is because it's visible. It's totally visible.
Yeah.
And you can tell how silly it was to begin with. They started out by targeting the Privy Councillors.
Yeah.
Well, so when we used to have tyrants, and we used to not have the rule of law, and we gradually sort of created it in this country. And as we clawed it back, we took away powers from our tyrant, which was the king. And the king was a tyrant. You go back to William the Conqueror, the man's a total tyrant. Doing anything he doesn't like will get you killed. There's no laws, no consistency. You just have to please the king. You know, I went on a holiday, a stag party to Wales, and we stayed in a castle, and there was an oubliette. So in the 12th century, if the Lord of the Manor didn't like you, or you'd done anything that irritated him, or he just fancied throwing you in the oubliette, he threw you in the oubliette and you didn't come out. Eventually, we started to think, hang on a second, shouldn't we have some rules about who goes in the
Stop throwing random people in.
and who doesn't? And that's what we mean by creating the rule of law, the rule of the consistent application of rules. And we took all these powers away from the king. Now, one of the very few things we've left the king, sort of before we could totally emasculate these monarchs, is we left him his Privy Council. It is His Majesty's most noble Privy Council. It is to advise him, and it's for him to discipline his Privy Councillors. It is not for Parliament or for Harriet Harman
to discipline,
to start telling off his Privy Councillors. So that, again, is just a massive constitutional blunder. Why even do that? They didn't have to. They could have said, we'll discipline all MPs. And if they disciplined all MPs, you'd be like, well, a parliamentary committee might be the proper place to discipline all MPs. But to single out the Privy Councillors, that's just constitutionally inept. Okay, and I'm not involved. I haven't talked to anybody else about the fact that that is constitutionally inept. I'm not involved in some sort of conspiracy to point out that they keep making mistake after mistake after mistake. But this is another mistake. Well done, committee. This is embarrassing now. We're a court, and we have the best judges in the world, the absolute best in the world, and the world comes here to use our judges because they are the best in the world. But I would not say that our judges are perfect. And we've had embarrassing situations where a judge has behaved in
Brexit days.
Well, arguably with Aaron Banks, that wasn't terribly edifying for the judiciary to have somebody say, yes, you lied, but it didn't cause any loss. Ooh, nice that the Court of Appeal then came along and said, no, forget that happened. This is the rule of law again. And the Court of Appeal restores the rule of law, restores respectability. There is no appellate process. There's nobody there to come along to this committee. I mean, in theory, I think you're constitutionally right. In theory, I think the Speaker could step in and say, the Speaker of the House thanks the Parliament Committee on Privileges for its kind work, which we will completely ignore. I mean, it's actually very clever from Rishi and the government. I think they suggested that Conservative MPs just might note it. Let's all come along and go, we note that this occurred.
Yeah.
And then moving on.
It's like an advisory referendum. Yeah, thank you for your vote.
It's a way to get over the issue. But I can tell you right now that it is no way to solve the rule of law issue to start going around threatening everybody.
No.
I mean, how bad does that look? Because that's, we're going to have a show trial, right? Anybody who says it's a show trial, we're going to, what are you going to do? We'll punish them. Okay, this is getting very much sort of if they float, they're a witch, and if they drown, they were innocent. I mean,
I mean, politics aside, and in terms of the political leanings of MPs, it seems like when it comes to these sort of situations and the chaos we've had in the House for the past few years, the quality or lack of quality of our politicians, it makes it compare it to like even recent years, as in like, a few decades ago when the old establishment, the politicians that we had, you might look back and be like, well, I didn't really agree with their vision or their policies, but the old establishment, they were mostly professional, successful lawyers who then became MPs. So in terms of the constitution and the way House worked, it was more stable because they knew what they were doing, right? Even though if they were out of touch, but at least the House was more respected and had some credibility compared to these guys, like the current class of MPs.
Well, it's really interesting. They basically stopped reading law, and I can tell, and so they didn't think that they had to, and I can tell you exactly why that happened. It's because the EU is writing it all for them and then giving it to them and telling them that they have to implement it whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
At which point you do stop reading the law. You don't need to read the law. All you need to do is to go in the media, be charming, get the people to like you, kiss babies, and get voted in, and that becomes your job. And a lot of them, I suspect, do think that this is still their job. I mean, is it interesting that when Parliament opened up, and don't quote me, but I think it's somewhere in the 1920s. It might have been earlier. It might be when we got full emancipation. One of the major complaints about Labour, when Labour was created, a lot of the sort of then Conservative MPs were like, oh, they're illiterate. They won't be able to read the law. They won't be competent at the job. And what those, I mean, that's pretty rude. So and it's a political position because it's an emotional position, but I'm sort of have a bit of sympathy with those Labour MPs, if I'm completely honest. But what they did was they set about teaching themselves to read and teaching themselves how to read law. And very quickly they got up to speed with it. And when you do that, when you make them read the law, they become much more able, much more functionally, and constitutionally able, much less likely to receive detailed advice from Lord Panic and go, yeah, I don't think I need to follow that. They're much less likely to do that. The dangers of what happens go aside. But we are certainly in a position, I think it would be a political position for me to talk about certainly any individual MP or to say anything about the quality. But I think as a matter of fact, they have stopped reading law.
But as you said, it's one problem, and we have talked about this, you and I, before privately, is the membership of the European Union constitutionally made our politicians or the political system slightly lazy because they didn't have to do things. They weren't really under pressure, on the spotlight. And now that we've left the EU, it's kind of been exposed now, right?
Well, I mean, once you're in the EU, they do all the heavy lifting on politics for you. And that's a neutral phase because, again, I'm not taking a position on the EU. And by the way, I mean, that's again, the Brexit referendum was a bit like this committee. It was hysterical. You weren't allowed to say things. I had to block, I'm going to say, maybe I won't do any identifying features, but an individual on Twitter because I was explaining something about the EU and EU law. Which they thought reflected negatively on the EU. I mean, I've also written things which reflect positively on the EU. My first ever article was "We must defend the EU." So I'm actually.
But you were being objective,
I'm objective. But this individual was so emotional about the idea that what I had written was so embarrassing for the EU that I mustn't say it. And he kept saying to me, "Oh, you're being political. You're being political." It's like, well, so the only way I can not be political is to endorse the EU. No, that's just gibberish. I mean, that's completely gibberish. I would become a politician if I endorsed the EU or decried it. So I do neither. I simply explain what's going on. And that was, the Brexit debate. We weren't allowed to say things which were perfectly true. And now the committee says we're not allowed to say things which are perfectly true. This has got a long sort of established history, but it's constitutionally embarrassing because it's not dealing with law in a proper or grown-up way. And it's very hard for my profession because when I say, a Casey weighed in at the weekend, it's very hard for us to sort of step in. We don't want to because we remember the old division between law and politics, and we ought to stay out of things. One of the criticisms that I can feel levied at me, which I sort of have a bit of sympathy with, is that I probably shouldn't be talking to you, and I probably shouldn't be writing articles, and I probably shouldn't be going on the telly this afternoon.
Don't have any views.
At the end of the day, if I don't, then how on earth are the public going to know any law?
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
And if everybody's running around in law being silly and using it for gain,
who's going to protect it? Yeah. That's the problem. Yeah, it's a very thin line, I guess. And you always try to be professional in terms of not getting political about it. But as you said, yeah, it is quite difficult. Some people would say even this is too far. But if you don't talk about it, if none of your colleagues talk about it, then who does? So that's the problem. Anyway, thank you so much, Stephen Barrett, for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll have some sanity at some point. Let's go. Let's go back to the show, guys. Wow, that was Stephen Barrett's very, very interesting discussion, conversation about all this matters. Let's go to the live chat. I'm going to get your reactions. A few things I noticed when we were doing the interview. I'm going to respond to them. Ego Chip says, Mahyar claims to be a citizen journalist, but he is pushing the globalist distraction. Okay, it's a perfect example of an emotional argument. One, I am not a journalist. I take that as an insult. I never claimed to be a citizen journalist. Secondly, this is the problem, because this channel, we talk about everything. I talk about the party political nonsense, and because I'm not party political, so I can attack all of them. I talk about the health issues. I talk about the globalist issues. I talk about foreign policies and everything else. But when I do a video on, I don't know, strawberries, people would say, well, he's talking about this. That implies that Mahyar doesn't talk about, I don't know, excess deaths, for example. Well, I talk about all of them. And it matters to talk about party politics. It does matter to talk about parliament, because this is the platform for the same globalist agenda. So the likes of Klaus Schwab and the WF and any of these people who have all these ideas, they are using our politicians and the political platform to promote it, to implement policies. So you have to criticize and you have to hold parliament to account and our governments. We can't just sit there and then talk about some speech that Bill Gates just made. That's not good enough, because that speech that Bill Gates makes could influence what Justin Trudeau is going to be doing in Canada. So you have to talk about both. You have to target both in order to bring some sanity into the debate. There we go. Liquid Zero. Does Mahyar ever deal with the current excess deaths situation? Well, we have. The problem with the channel is that we upload so many videos. But recently we've talked about, over the last couple of years, we've been talking about this. I even had Andrew Bridgen on recently to talk about this. It's important to talk about, and again, if you want to stay up to date with everything else, it's best to subscribe and watch everything. But you don't have to watch the topics you don't care about. But we have been talking about lockdown harms and the excess deaths and everything else that happened since then. But it doesn't mean if I one day talk about Keir Starmer, it doesn't mean that I'm not talking about the other stuff. Anyway, next, Trinity93 says, I like Boris, but he is dishonorable. I feel let down by the party I voted for. Yeah, I absolutely agree with this. Well, I don't really like Boris. I don't like or dislike Boris per se. I tend not to follow figures or not follow them. It's best to just focus on ideas. That matters more, vision. Saying goodbye to Boris means that you are accepting the rule of Rashid Sunak. Think on that. But that's also a very good point, because as I've seen so many comments in the live chat today, they say you don't have to like Boris, or you don't have to be on the side of Boris to see it as a witch hunt, or to see it as some people in Parliament are using it to reverse Brexit. Obviously, Boris Johnson is a liberal green hippie. We know that. We disagree with his policies on this channel. But doesn't mean that the establishment wouldn't go against him. So just because he's part of the establishment doesn't mean that the establishment wouldn't attack him. They would attack me and you, but they would also attack Boris Johnson, because they see him, for some reason, as the advocate for this side, even though he's the one promoting net zero nonsense. So, yeah. Okay, let's see. Oh, dear God. All right. Where was the Privileges Committee when the Labour Blair lied about Iraq in Parliament? Well, earlier on, for those of you, if you joined late, at the beginning of the video, we also compared the punishments. So you have Boris Johnson. He was going to receive a 12 weeks punishment, right? Margaret Ferrier only received the SNP MP who broke the rules as well, received a 30-day punishment. Some of the members of the Privileged Committee voted to give her 9 days. Rob Roberts, who was suspended based on sexual misconduct and being creepy, only received 6 weeks suspension. So you can see that it wasn't proportionate, the punishment for Boris Johnson. What else do we have? Mac10 says, don't listen to them. You're on the front line of what needs to be talked about. Thank you so much for the lovely, lovely support. What do we have? Divide and Conquer says, please refer to Johnson as Johnson or Boris Johnson, not the familiar first name only. Well, he's turning to like Cher. Everyone just says Boris, but it's just free society, free speech. You can call it whatever. You can call him a melon if you want to. Watermelon, but probably better because he's a green hippie. Green on the outside, red on the inside. All right. You can also call me whatever you want. You don't have to call me Mahyar 2C or 2C. All right. So what else do we have? Yeah. Let's not be demoralized because of the clownery in the courts. That's a good point as well. AM says, I hope Boris Johnson joins with Nigel Farage. And Super Deadland says, I wouldn't see it as a witch hunt if they did the same to Starmer for his beer and curry. Margaret Ferry got nothing, disproportionate Kangaroo. This is also fascinating because if Privileges Committee was going after Starmer, for example, the supporters of Starmer would have called it the Kangaroo Court. If the committee was going against Jeremy Corbyn fans would have called it the Kangaroo Court. And the same people who are saying, how dare Boris Johnson call it Kangaroo Court, they would have called it Kangaroo Court if it was against their team. So, but no one's honest about their own biases. But we try to be on this channel. All right. Robert Johnson says, Boris is getting the Trump treatment. He's obviously a threat to the blob. Yeah, and this is the thing. So there will be some people again in the live chat saying, yeah, but Boris is more establishment than Trump. He's part of the liberal elite. But that's irrelevant. As I said earlier, you can still be part of the establishment, but the establishment could still destroy you if they see you as a threat. Donald Trump is also, to an extent, establishment. He's the elite. He was a New York liberal millionaire. And he was part of the political structure. He was a massive political donor. And obviously, he's still more anti-establishment by being inside the establishment. Similar thing you could say about Ronald Reagan in the 80s. Different level, obviously. But Ronald Reagan was also a similar character. Very different policies, obviously. But yeah, so we could... But two things could be true at once. But Boris Johnson is a liberal green hippie establishment. And also, he's getting the Trump treatment from the establishment. That's the truth. Julie says Trump has more balls than Boris. Absolutely. I haven't counted them, but yes. I can imagine Trump has more balls than Boris. It's funny because Boris only lashes out when it's too late. Throughout the whole process, he was so diplomatic and nice about the Privileges Committee and all this. He can't do a Trumpian thing. Trump goes hard and robust from day one when he's under attack. So maybe Boris could learn from Donald a little bit. Dave says WHO versus sovereignty. Yeah, I'm actually on that. Don't forget to watch, if you haven't, watch our interview with Andrew Bridgen, my good friend Andrew, who talked to us about the WHO treaty and everything else that's going to be happening. It's very important to talk about national sovereignty because I think the political spectrum is no longer about left and right in a traditional sense. It is about control versus freedom. It's about globalism versus national sovereignty. So back in the day, if you were to call yourself a nationalist, it would have sounded just absurd, but also very, very extreme in the 20th century. But now we have to normalize the word nationalism because if you're a nationalist, you're simply caring about your nation. And you're against ultra globalism. It doesn't mean you're from the 1930s Germany. So that's the problem with the wording and labels and everything else that's been happening. Anyway, we have so much to talk about today. If you joined late, make sure to just scroll back to the beginning of the video. We gave you guys all the updates. And we're going to come back every half an hour with so much chaos, and not just about this Westminster gossipy nonsense, but also important issues of the day. The best thing you can do is subscribe to the channel and share the channel with everybody that you know, even your enemies. I'm Mahyar 2C, and we are the media.